How about we start today's episode with a very popular game amongst kids? A name called Name Plays Animal Thing. So, shall I say start and you'll start counting the alphabets in your head?
Okay.
Yeah? Start. Stop.
E. E.
I'll start. Okay. E name Edward. Place Edinburgh. Animal elephant. Thing editor. An editing tool. No, that's not. It's too much. Too big a word. Okay. Elevator. How about you?
Okay. Start. Stop.
F. Your
F.
turn.
Okay. Name from F. Francesa. Place from F. France. Animal fish. Thing is a forest something.
Today's topic, in some forms and shape, connect the animal elephant that I mentioned and the thing forest that Vihan mentioned. So we are going to talk about how on islands creatures as giant as elephant tend to become smaller, whereas small creatures such as maybe tiny little rats end up growing bigger than their relatives who live on mainland spaces. Some people call this island dwarfism, which means if you go to an island which is really far away from mainland spaces, which very likely also have a lot of forests, you'll find that most of the creatures which are very, very big on mainland spaces like elephants tend to become smaller on the islands. Whereas on the same islands, tiny little creatures like mice and rats end up becoming really, really big. Not as big as an elephant, they are just bigger than their relatives on the mainland.
Wow!
For those of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, this is Sangeeta, your host from India. I host this podcast channel called What's New Today. It's a kids and family podcast where in every episode we take one very interesting current news story or something that fascinates children, like this piece of scientific research which was published in the last couple of years. So to talk about today's topic, I have with me.
Hi, my name is Vihan Arora. I am from Mumbai and I go to Bombay Scottish School. I am almost 11.
So Vihan, if you met a complete stranger on the street, right? And if you had to tell them three things about yourself, two of them which are true and one is false, what would that be? And I'm going to try and guess of the three things that you say, which of them is false.
Okay. So the first one is I have been scuba diving. The second one is that I am 5 foot.
You are 5 feet tall.
Yeah, I'm saying it as like either a truth or a lie. So I'm 5 foot.
Okay, got it.
And the third one is I love math and science.
Okay. You're 11 years old. You're almost 11, so you're being 5 foot tall is very reasonable. And yeah, you might like math and science, but I think the minimum age for scuba diving in most parts of the world is 12. So my guess is that is a false statement that you have been scuba diving. Was I right?
Yes, you are right. I have been to US recently. Somebody in my family has gone scuba diving. I have gone underwater with them, but not scuba diving, just snorkeling.
You snorkeled above at the water level.
And I went a little bit in.
Went a little bit in. Okay.
Even though I wasn't allowed to, and the instructors got really mad.
So Vihan, I know you've done a little bit of reading about this topic, which is called the island rule. Is there anything that really stood out in your head? And when you came across it, it was like, wow, I never thought this could be true.
The first thing is the topic itself. I never thought that rodents could become the size of my, you can say, my upper body. And I did never know that a hippo can literally be the size of me. I always thought hippos would be ginormous.
Whoa, okay, that is really very scary for me to imagine. What do you think is the reason for hippos which are on land, which are pretty big, to become as tiny as Rihan?
I think the hippos on islands grow smaller because they are one of the natural biggest predators, and it's very hard for them to find food which is of this quantity.
Which is enough for them to
Yeah, for their
survive
quantity.
and therefore
For them,
retain their
yeah,
size.
yeah, for them to survive.
There's this tortoise called a giant tortoise, which you can find in the Galapagos Islands. I don't know if you've seen their pictures. A normal tortoise that most of us have seen weighs about 100 pounds. The giant tortoise of the Galapagos Islands weigh about 550 pounds. They are 5 times bigger than a normal tortoise. I can imagine a movie like Ratatouille with a tiny mouse. I just cannot imagine a Ratatouille being half the size of Bihar. What do you think is the reason for that?
On islands, the rodents like rats tend to grow bigger because the carnivores, and there's not that many predators, and also the predators which are there become smaller as they do not get any food. So this lets the rodents to live longer.
Wow! Wow!
So that's one thing that you found very interesting. Is there any particular creature whose name stands out in your head as having become much smaller?
The other thing which comes into my mind are the kangaroos, which are in Australia. Over a long period of time, the kangaroos to become smaller and smaller over time, and we call this dwarfing.
Oh, so the kangaroo that we see today is significantly smaller.
As compared to what it was.
And this is because Australia is an island. Oh wow, very interesting. And I'd like to share one thing that really stood out in my head when I was also reading about this topic, that this dwarfism or gigantism, these two things, is very stark if the island is very far away from the mainland. So the farther away an island is from mainland, the bigger the tiny animals become and the smaller the big animals become. So if the island is closer to the coast, apparently the effect is not that much.
That's cool. I
That's
didn't
cool.
know that.
So for those of you who are interested in reading more about this island rule was first proposed by a biologist called J. Bristol Foster in the year 1964. So if you want to Google for it, you might want to Google for it as Foster's rule, or you could Google for it as the island effect. On that very interesting note, we'll move to the What's New Today riddle section.
Why is the letter T like an island?
The letter T.
Yes.
What's the letter T? I'm trying to think of the letter T in caps and in small. There's water all around. It's surrounding. No idea. What's the answer?
The answer is because it's in the middle of the water. You were very close.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. I loved it. On that note, shall we move to the next interesting part, the What's New Today quiz section?
Okay.
Okay, now 3 questions. Would you like to ask me or shall I ask you?
I'll ask you two.
Go ahead, ask me 2 and I'll ask you 1. That sounds fun.
So I make whatever question I want.
Yeah, you can ask me any question, but the question is to be based on what we've spoken, because this is a section where we would like our listeners to test themselves. whether they were paying attention to you and me.
Okay. Okay, I have one. I have one. I have one. What do we call an animal shrinking from a long to medium period of time?
Dwarfism.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Why do animals like rodents become bigger on islands?
Because there aren't enough predators around to eat them. So over a period of time, as they evolve in size, they end up becoming a little bigger than their mainland relatives.
Correct.
Thank you very much. So shall I ask you the third question?
Okay.
So imagine there's an elephant on a mainland, okay, like maybe in India, and let's say there's an island which is about 100 kilometers from the coast of India, and there is another island which is about 500 kilometers from the coast of India. Where would I likely find an elephant shrinking more in size?
You would likely find an elephant shrinking more in size where the island is 500 kilometers away from the coast of India.
Thank you very much, Rehan. Before we wrap up the episode, I'd like to find out if there's any one episode in the recent past that you've loved listening to on What's New Today that you would like to recommend to our listeners.
Can I recommend mine?
Why not?
I would like to recommend my first ever podcast, which I did with Sangeeta ma'am. It is about how soccer men players receive more money than women players, even though the women win championships and the men do not. They still earn more money.
It is one of my favorite episodes, and I always rejoice at the fact that, when we did record this, you were about 10 years old and you were so clear that this is so unfair. No, the people who play well ought to be paid the best, regardless of their gender. So, you have your sense of right and wrong very, very clearly. So, I do definitely recommend this episode to all our listeners. I think it's episode 33 on season 1 of What's New Today.
Can I say one more?
Yeah.
I don't remember the name.
I
mean, the episode, I know the topic. I also like the one, that podcast, which was about the floating city near South Korea, called Busan.
You're fascinated by the idea of cities floating in the ocean.
Yes.
True. It is episode 27 for those of you that would like to go and listen to it. Thank you so much, Rehan. It was a lot of fun chatting with you.
I enjoyed researching about this topic a lot because it really changed the perspective of how I looked at this.
You mean at animals now? So you look at elephants very differently and hippos very differently the next time you see them.
Yeah. So next time when I'm on an island scary at night, I would remember that the predators are actually not that big.
Very interesting perspective. That was lovely, Rehan. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks for listening.